Hi, boss.
Hey brother, how you doing?
I'm good. And you?
I'm all absolutely doing great. How's been your day?
Okay. My day, we have been here and there,
Awesome,
we're
awesome.
trying
Good to hear that.
to celebrate International Education Day.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
needful.
yeah,
We need actors like yourself to, create a platform to be able to talk about cogent matters.
yeah. And you are doing the job behind the scene. Hmm? I said, uh, hello. Can you hear me? Hello. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Yes. Apologies. Just give us some time. We'll be back now. We'll be back very soon. Might be network issues. There is the internet. Just give us some minutes, please. You'll soon be here. Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay. Glad to have you back. Yes, we lose some persons, but they'll be back. So,
I'm with you.
um, so let's shoot, please.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
know you've done a lot of work in terms of access to education.
No more.
Now. So, we've had a lot of challenges due to COVID. I know
Yeah.
today we are celebrating International Education Day, and subsequently the theme is to recover and revitalize the COVID generation, education for the COVID generation. So
Hmm.
where do we start from? First, let's talk about where do we start from for Nigeria. Do you understand?
Okay.
Where does
Yeah.
Nigeria start from? Do you understand? Before we then talk about the challenges,
Yes.
of course, the challenges are numerous. But let's talk about where do we start
Hmm.
from?
Okay. For me, fundamentally, I think there are two things that are, significant in this current times. The first one is we need to close the gap on learning losses that happened as a result of the fact that schools were closed and our children sat for home for many months and they cannot
Like
access
5 to 6
education. We
months.
need to do something
Yeah,
around. Yeah, absolutely. What they did means during that time, we need to catch up for them. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we need to
exactly.
build the resilience of our educational system just to ensure that in case there is another occasion of, a
Yeah, yeah,
pandemic or an humanitarian crisis or emergency, right?
yeah,
How
yeah.
fortified or resilient are we to be able to cater for the learning needs and educational outcomes of our children? Now, those are the two things that I think are fundamental at this time. The first thing, however, which is about closing learning gaps and recovering learning losses, we won't be able to do that if, for one, we do not open up our formal or conventional education systems, right? Because that's the only thing we've got. If you ask me, Nigeria as a country do not have an effective remote education or distance learning system, right? Whatever we put in place during COVID-19 is an emergency intervention. We are not like some countries that do have some things in place that if today they decide to transition to distance learning or remote education, they will cope well. Am I making sense?
Yeah,
So
sure.
if you ask me, we need to get back to public education, right? We need to open our schools. But we cannot do that if we do not address the health and safety guideline component of that reopening, right? And for us to ensure we do that, wait, is this thing open? A lot of people are reaching out to me that they can't see that we are live.
It's open.
Okay. Let me just,
So
send a message. It's on Instagram. You send me something. Now, the first thing that Nigeria is not getting right in terms of the safe reopening of schools, the first one is the fragmentation of efforts across all levels. If you ask me,
true.
policymakers, international partners would ask you, who exactly is calling the shot when it comes to reopening of schools in Nigeria, right? The presidential task force on COVID has their own perspective on what school reopening should look like, right? The Federal Ministry of Education has their own idea of what school reopening should look like. Categorically, the House of Assembly Committee on Education will tell you that they are not even consulted, right, when all of these strategies are being put together. The federal document on safe school reopening is being put together by the Education in Emergencies Working Group, who is, one of the leading components of organizations that are supporting the federal government in humanitarian response coordination. If we do not have a unification of efforts across all levels, we will not have safe reopening of schools. And trust me, there needs to be a safe reopening of schools before we talk about the safe reopening of learning. It's two different things, right? We can open our schools, right? Our students can come in and they are not learning the fundamentals. They are not learning the foundational competencies of them being in school in the first place, right? The new normal, right, of what we know right now, which is leveraging on, e-learning platforms or remote. I've not even gone to that because we are still on the level of how do we reopen our schools. Now, another thing that is affecting that is the disconnection if states decide to make their decisions separately from the federal government. Because, for example, you see states like Rivers State or Lagos State saying we are not going to open on this day, right? That is totally fine. But at the same time, it is because of the local realities within, those states. These are states maybe that have high proliferation of cases of COVID-19, right? It is understandable. But you want to ask yourself, what is the capacity? And when I mean capacity, I mean the physical and even the intellectual capacity of the education authorities to put in place the right methodologies in place to get schools ready. I love what the Lagos State government is doing. Right now, teachers will need to take an online course to test or assess their readiness for them to get back to school and open school safely. Exactly. And beyond that, schools will have to take an approval before they can open when the schools have been certified to be ready, putting in place all, the strategies of safe reopening. Exactly. Now, there needs to be a coordination of interstate decision-making process. This is something I will refer to as a pocket of promise that some states can learn from and adopt, right? They just have to be able to cross-pollinate ideas from one state to another. That is if we're having problem of coordination on the federal level. the responsibility gets on the states, and other states can learn from them. Now, lastly, for that question on how it's been affected, would be the exclusion of some key stakeholders in the returning to learning or school reopening process, right? Categorically, so I'm currently involved in a research study with USAID on how, you know, returning to learning is being coordinated in Nigeria. And by asking questions around, it is evident, painfully, that key stakeholders at the grassroots, including school-based management committees and even suburb heads, have been excluded from, you know, contributing vital information, vital thoughts, insights on how reopening should happen, right? All of these guys are people who work at the school level and community level. Their insights, whether we like it or not, will form a critical mass of whatever we decide to do on the state or federal level. But I am not surprised because, you know, prior to the pandemic, do we have a seamless transition of information and leadership in Nigeria? I disagree. I don't think we have.
I think that was where I was going to, because you've mentioned you've talked a lot about collaboration now. Do you understand? So it begs the question how information are being shared among these groups. And you know what we understand in this part of the world is, if you want to share information, there needs to be a meeting, people will gather together, there will be a hall, there will be refreshments, there will be per diem. So these things cause a lot of rancor, and we lose focus of the main goal, which is actually, in this sense, safe reopening. So because of those little things, then we don't have these meetings, and we begin to shout, oh, there is no collaboration among officials, which then sabotages the whole process on the long run. But I think some extent we might have covered the conversation to the end, but maybe we need to come back a little. Do you understand? So when COVID happened, for example, schools were being shut down by March 22. Do you understand? At that stage, what was the first thing, in your own thoughts now, what was the first thing the federal government is supposed to have done? Do you understand?
The Nigerian, if you mean the Nigerian federal government, I would say we are not there yet. We don't have that yet, right? But I think I can frame that around some very technical practice and policy ideas, right? The first thing would be that there is something called education in emergencies. It's a field in education. It's a field that there are so many networks that are dedicated. There are so many courses that are dedicated to advancing the understanding of the provision of education during emergencies. And when you talk about emergencies, it's more about not only conflict, but also in health emergencies. The last 10 to 11 years has found himself providing education or coordinating educational provision and delivery in places of high education emergencies, right? There has been protracted conflict and crisis in northern Nigeria for more than 10 years, right? And the understanding of how educational coordination has happened in the northeastern part of Nigeria should have been the go-to knowledge base in responding to the exclusion of school closures during COVID, right? But because it is la patch, la duam, la siam, we don't have a system in place, right? And that is why one country that did not suffer at all, and that is why we have a field called comparative education. Do we have people who are translocating ideas and building up a knowledge base that we can always leverage on year in, year out? Liberia, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone experienced the huge consequences of Ebola crisis in 2014 to 15. I can tell you categorically that learning losses in any of these three countries cannot be compared to Nigeria during COVID-19 pandemic. And you know why? They had the experience to bank on, right? They have created a system that when COVID-19 happened, it wasn't a problem for them to seamlessly adapt.
Adapt quickly.
When they now adapt, beyond adapting, there's something called transformational capacity, right? It is something that needs to be built into educational systems. And that's why there's a concept called system strengthening. Our system is weak to respond and provide education in conflict and emergencies. And that's the reason why when COVID happened, everything went wobble wobble.
Down,
right?
down, totally down.
Yeah, absolutely. But there are a number of things that I think should have been put in place. Nothing more other than a distant learning or remote education system. Because that's what happened, right? Ability for our children not to learn. Okay, good. You're back. By and large, that remote learning or distance education capacity is heavily dependent on one thing. It's heavily dependent on technology, right? Now, when you make mention of technology, a lot of people think you are talking about smartphone or internet penetration.
Exactly.
Well, it is included because even in itself, Nigeria do not have a robust internet penetration or internet connectivity index. We do not have it, right? And then you will see that there's a huge connection between all of these things, right? And how educational provision was coordinated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, many of these responses were affected by a number of reasons. The first one that I think is digital education or digital illiteracy. And that's such concept, right? They say we have this National Orientation Agency. Learning or distance education opportunities, they need to be informed and educated about these platforms, right? But people do not even know if you provide digital devices for people to be able to study during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can they even use it? This is part of the
Larry, this conversation we are having right now makes you so sad. Because the way the conversation goes now is like we are digging deep into those things that are resulting. And you know, the more we dig deeper, the more it looks bigger. Do you understand that? Are we even going to be able to solve any of these situations?
We can solve it, right? But it takes logically situation to be able to respond holistically to the needs, to the educational needs of our children. Trust me, there is nothing impossible. And for me, I think one of the things I was expecting to talk about would be, what are those things that we could do, right? Let's say there's another lockdown tomorrow. There's another lockdown tomorrow. What should happen? For educational access and technology usage across, you want to say something?
I get that part, which we still need to talk about. But we must also, as young people now, begin to look at what was the problem itself, which you've mentioned so far. And I think that part that we highlighted in terms of, that part of information share, and it's a bad culture in Nigeria because any opportunity to have a meeting, we turn it to Owambe. Do you understand? And so far, we keep on having this mentality whereby somebody cannot just develop a solution and share across board via email or get feedback, rationalize it together, and it is approved. Then everybody moves. This can take less than 24 hours. In the age of emails, you can share emails quickly and move on. And implementation follows immediately. I believe these are these things.
Absolutely.
Do you understand? Oh, we need to do what do we want to achieve in ensuring that these kids are learning? We need to develop a new curriculum. We need to do massive testing for teachers. We need to develop their training capacity. We need to put them on online platforms. We need to move these kids there. How do we ensure that, we want to use radio? Fine. Let's move quickly. In less than 3 days, these things are just listed that can be achieved. And then we move on. But you see, exactly. For me, leadership. Leadership is the first thing, because I think at a time when school resumption was going to happen, there was political tussle between the federal minister and the state minister for education. The minister for education and the state minister they were having rancors, and I was like, is it this bad? Do you understand? So
I
So
understand.
these are situations that are bad. Do you understand? But
Mm-hmm.
one thing we must then do is to then see. But I think first, let us talk about how it affected schools. We've talked about leadership. How did it affect schools themselves?
Well, the way it affected
Schools
schools
and children. Now,
is,
how did it affect them?
well, big gods to schools was lack of digital infrastructure, right? There are some schools that,
Hmm?
as at the time that schools were closed, their teachers, in one way or the other, have been capacitated to, set up and provide education, away from school and from home. But many of those
Okay.
teachers themselves do not even understand how they can use, let's say, for example, Zoom for studies, right? And there is no way, if teachers cannot, leverage on digital technologies themselves, that they will be able to leverage on it to be able to, provide education for children. That was
Okay.
fundamental, right? For some schools, and I think it is something that is often not talked about much, is something I call teacher motivation, right? Most of our teachers are not happy, right? They are not
Okay.
happy because they are not well compensated, if you ask me,
Mm.
right? Now,
Yeah.
if you don't compensate teachers well, there is no way teachers will go far and wide to say they want to ensure the provision of education for children. Now, you move from the school level, you go to the teachers level, right? Now, it is a
Okay.
well-felt teachers. You reached out to me during COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Yeah. 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 Yes,
It
that's
is
true.
a concept on its own called education. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Continue. I
Hello?
can hear you. Yes, I can hear you
It's
now.
called deprofessionalization. Okay. It's called deprofessionalization of education. When you
Okay.
have,
Can you sit? Can you
when
sit
you,
down now?
I'm looking for where to plug my phone actually.
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
yeah. Uh,
You
okay.
got in a place now.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Fine.
fantastic.
Okay.
So it's called deprofessionalization of education, right?
Okay.
Which is predominantly about how, hold on, please. Which is predominantly the um, the fact that teaching as a profession has not continually been compensated or appreciated needfully the
Yeah.
way it's supposed to be. Because you have a lot of
Teachers' welfare.
teachers, absolutely, that in itself was a big challenge. It is only a teacher that is well fed and well nourished that will go far and
Did
beyond
you
to
see the
ensure that
video of the teacher that was crying during the COVID
you
season?
sent
You know,
you
they
sent
suffered
that
a
video
lot.
to me. Absolutely. You sent that video to me and it was so painful. So painful that months after, when I was designing a tech solution for, learning content delivery, I do not need teachers, but I felt that this solution is something that if we bring teachers on board as content developers and they earn as low as 5,000 or 10,000, it would aid them a lot. So the absence of
Exactly.
defined teacher welfare packages during COVID-19 pandemic was a huge problem. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we always and we often say that an educational system cannot outlive the quality of its teachers. Beyond the quality, beyond the professional standards of the teachers, we need to talk about the mental and psychological well-being of those teachers. Now, let me move away from teachers and let's even talk about how communities themselves. We spoke about schools, we spoke about teachers. Now I'm going to communities. In many
Okay.
developed countries, there are some communities, even in some African countries, some communities who took up the responsibility of providing educational access, even leveraging on digital for their children. But community capacity is heavily dependent on individual capacity within the community. Now, communities will not be able to help themselves if individuals within those communities can't help themselves. Now, there is an
Exactly.
underlying significance of poverty that a lot of people are not speaking about, right?
Hmm.
Now, that in itself translates to so many disadvantages and anomaly during COVID-19 pandemic. Would someone who have not eaten do U-Lesson subscription, even though U-Lesson was a viable learning solution during COVID-19? Right? Even when Area High designed a low-cost technological tool that you can, learn from, I must tell you that we distributed mobile phones in some schools in Abuja. We went back there in 11 days, brother. More than half of beneficiaries have sold the phones that we provided them.
Like, seriously?
Absolutely. I was hungry. My team said we need to go back to understand because it influences future projects and interventions. We went there and we learned categorically that parents are saying, mi ò tíì jẹun, mi ò lo fóònù, ìwọ wá fẹ́ máa lo fóònù. Now, that is poverty at its finest form.
Wow.
You cannot talk about all of these things without addressing all of these fundamental issues outplaying themselves at the community levels. Now, I was talking about poverty, right? The affordability of data costs in itself, or even the affordability of smartphone devices. It's a lot of things.
So, sorry to cut in here. So we did this research during the COVID-19 around August, September to understand the respondents on how COVID-19 affected them and education. And one of those correlations you discovered then was parents lose their jobs.
Yes.
Do you understand? Sales dropped. Do you understand? Kids are at home and they're just left to play.
Yeah.
Do you understand? So you then see the connection between parents saying, "Oh, we are even supposed to address feeding first before we start talking about, oh, you want to do subscription or you want to get learning material, maybe learning devices, mobile devices for he or she to learn." So education became last cater in family needs and feeding became number one. And it's just about rationing for them. So when you begin to talk about education, they are like, from where to where? We are not even done with the feeding aspect, the welfare aspect. They are talking about education. And it poses a great challenge.
Absolutely. And if you ask me, I will tell you it's fundamentally based on the resilience capacity of our educational system. Because by and large, right, UNESCO or UNICEF has established the quality education framework that has 5 components: learners, learning environment, content, processes, and outcomes. And under the learners, they are saying that learners must be well-fed, well-nourished, supported in learning by their families and communities. That means if learners are missing out of those 4 things, learning outcomes cannot be achieved. Now, that is a given.
Exactly.
So if a government doesn't prioritize that, now, there's even a guiding principle in education in emergencies, right? When conflict or crisis happens, right? And there is crisis response coordination. There are 6 basic things that should be provided in a conflict or crisis situation. And they are being rated according to the point of importance. Do you know the last?
What's the last?
Education. Now, why that in itself is flawed, right? It is only countries who do not have outlined plans to provide all of the 6 that will find themselves getting the last item on the list to suffer at the end of the day. Because if you have plans in place to provide all the 6, one will not suffer instead of the other, right?
Exactly.
And it is that